Budget meeting of June 5th, 7:30, call to order, roll call, noting two board members are here. Mark Hetzel is not. Need a approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Moves forward, passed. Public comments. Any public comments that you guys heard? So let's move on. Budget update. Steve, you want to take us through that?
Sure, I'm just going to introduce what we're covering today, and I'm going to turn it over to Ally. So we've got some agenda items under our 22-23 budget. So we're wrapping up the end of this fiscal year, and there's some procedural things that need to be done, and we'll explain what those are. And then we're going to then jump into 23-24 budget planning and talk about where we're at with that process. And I will add some comments here and there, but other than that, Ellie's going to walk us through the agenda item, and there's a couple that Brian's probably going to comment on as well.
Sure. Sounds good. So the first agenda item is going over the projected end of the year balance. In the next agenda item, you'll see kind of how we got to this number, but right now we're projecting a positive balance of approximately $400,000 for Fund 10. We're also going to want to discuss the topic of the Fund 73 post-employment benefit contribution at the next budget committee meeting in July. We did hold off on making the payment last year until the end of the fiscal year, so we could get a better picture of what our financial position was going to be. We would need to make the payment by July 31st if we're going to make one this year, but we'll be looking for your guys' feedback at the next meeting in July. The next agenda item is the budget revisions that we had for this fiscal year. Every year we bring them to the board in June for approval, and there is a document that is the DPI required format that you guys can look at in a little bit more detail. But some of the main things that we did for budget revisions this year were changes in grant allocations, changes to common school funds. We had an increase in the utility budget, an increase in transportation. And if you'll recall, that was to reflect the invoices that came in from last year that we had to pay for in this fiscal year. One really noteworthy budget revision that we had to make this year was we had an increase in revenues for interest earnings. There was a really significant increase. We only budgeted $10,000 and we're projecting to end somewhere around $500,000 for interest earnings.
Where's that coming from?
The referendum funds. We had an increase in special education aid. We had Fund 39 budget, debt service budgets, and this was to record the new debt that we issued from the November 2022 referendum. We had our transfer of funds between Fund 10 and 27. We had the Fund 49 capital projects to record transactions to pay for expenditures from the November 22 referendum. We had some changes in Fund 80 to reflect the increased cost from Warrior Media. And then we also added the budget for communications, which is Annie. And then we also updated Fund 50 to reflect the increased cost of the food service operations. And this was due to inflationary increases. And then we also had our final input from last fiscal year that crossed over into this fiscal year. Fund 21 had a reduction in revenues to reflect the actual activity compared to what was budgeted. And then we moved the $1 million from the property tax from Fund 39 to Fund 10. And this was based on the approval of the referendum last November. And then we also added in a special education teacher at Heritage to be reflected in the expenditure budget.
One of the things we talked about is increasing the athletic budget. Have we talked about that, or should we consider putting more money into the athletic?
I'd probably answer that with two parts. The first one, we were able to accomplish last fall, which was when we saw the Title IX report. The board did initially make some decisions that improved the budget for the athletic department. The second part is Randy's been leading us through a 6 or 8 month process of engaging booster clubs. And as a part of that, ultimately, the hope is that will lead to a process where we will get a better understanding of the expenditures that they have. And our intention is to ultimately show those expenditures to the school board and have it be a little bit more clear than it's been in the past. With the main goal of having a chance to look and see, are there expenditures that are currently being covered by booster clubs that we would look at it and say it's a core activity. An example would be wrestling raises money for the wrestling mats. So I think a question we pose to ourselves is, should the district be purchasing the basic wrestling mat that they use? Or is that an expectation of a booster club to raise the money for a wrestling mat? Gymnastics has similar things. There was a discussion this year about, did the boosters need to buy the beam? So it's those type of things, Jack, that we do want to continue that dialogue on, because it's very likely in the end, I think the board would probably weigh in that there's expenditures that maybe we think the district should be taking on instead of asking boosters to raise. Rainey, do you have anything to
Yeah, I
add to
think
that?
it's just the whole piece that every dollar the boosters are spending towards the core part of the program is money that they're having to raise in the community. So that's something that we should, as we can get a better handle on some of those expenditures. So we'd be bringing those in. And that's not everything boosters do, but there's certainly some things that Steve can articulate in those two examples that I think are relevant for us to look at for all of those.
I know the football paid for half the irrigation. And the weight room, yeah, things like that. And once you put your money in, then it's kind of yours. And it's, not necessarily, yes, it's for the good of the entire community, but the priority tends to go in one way.
And those are good examples. I mean, we did a cost sharing on the weight room when the touchdown club did that. There's been some pieces over time that they've added there. And I think that's conversations I've had with some of their leadership is, those are some things that you just need to talk to us about what some of those are, because some of those get used by a lot of kids. Not just the football. They're used throughout the school day, they're used more than after school.
I think
Those
those
are, they're gonna get a handle on.
would be exercise bikes. And those are probably things that you should probably have for athletic equipment. So anyways, that's a 24 discussion. Okay, thank you.
If there's no further questions on that agenda item, we would look for approval to take it to the full board next Monday.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Let's move on.
The next agenda item is fund balance classifications. Every fiscal year, the board is required to approve the fund balance accounts prior to the close of the fiscal year. Rebecca, if you want to hold that document up, we can take a look at it. So we did bring this to you last fall and showed you the updated numbers for July 1st after our audit last year. We didn't make any changes except for the fact that now where Fund 40 is, we should just note that Fund 49 will now be on there, and that's where all of the referendum expenditures will be kept. So we need to be on this one too. So we look for approval on this one to go to the full board also.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Okay. Okay, the next agenda item speaks to 22-23 individual teacher salary increases. Brian's here to share a little bit about the concept of contract adjustments for specific teachers based on years of experience they were awarded when they were hired here originally. I will talk a little bit more about that.
I mean, this is, I know, something that you have heard a little bit about going as we've been developing the concept. But there was a period of time where the district was limiting the amount of experience that an individual had when they were hired. And or crediting them with a lower degree level. As a method of controlling hiring costs. Which has ultimately led to some internal equity issues. Individuals with same degree level, same levels of experience, doing this very similar work, being paid different amounts of money. And so this is an opportunity to use some of the operational referendum money to make a correction to those individuals that weren't credited fully. Raise their contracts to like peers, and then move forward with that. Those contracts being very, very similar.
So when did this change?
2018. So it was approximately
Why
20.
did you change?
For really for this reason, the internal equity issues that it creates. Generally, these staff had this information communicated to them in advance. So they signed a contract, knowing that that was occurring. Because they desire to be here. And then, that desire probably didn't wane, but once you're kind of immersed in the work and you see you're doing the job and somebody next to you is doing the same job and there's disparity in how you're being paid, it builds up some hard feelings over time.
When did we change from the concept that was there? Bringing people in?
Oh, you mean limiting it?
Yeah.
2011. It was I guess Steve or Randy could probably talk more in detail about it, Jack, but it was really in response to some very difficult budgetary years and a desire to try to fill open positions and keep costs as low as possible.
I think those were some of the years that we were struggling to get the dollars that we could for our returning staff. Wanting to make sure that we were doing everything we could for the folks who were here and have been here. So that was part of the cost control measure, was to we were limiting things to like 5 years experience. Obviously those were contracts that were offered and accepted. It's created some issues as we move forward, but those were primarily during some of the very challenging 2011 year time. So we were trying to balance the budget and also make sure that we were rewarded. It's time that we have to correct some of that. Brian has a good plan forward.
So how many of these, how many employees are affected from this?
There right now is 28 that are involved in that total of $141,678.
Any other questions, comments? Morning, Mark. Sorry.
So this would be an action item of the HR committee, because you're presenting that on the plan today. So for this committee, it's informational purposes as far as just being aware that dialogue is taking place, but you would be asking the HR committee to review it in a little more detail if they wanted to, and for a recommendation for the jury board meeting.
Right, yes,
So does this bring the 28 employees up to parity?
it does.
Next, we'll move on to budget planning for 23-24. We just finished up all of our staff presentations in all of the buildings last week, and now we're working on the second draft. So I'll go through some of the updates that we have in the second draft compared to the first. The second draft is still based on the rather conservative assumptions, considering we haven't heard anything on the state budget to be able to change those assumptions. But some of the changes in the second draft include, there was some grant allocations that were released, so we updated those. We updated Fund 50, which is the food service budget, and then we also updated any other budgets that were affected based on the school board approved fees from last month. We updated Fund 21. We also updated Fund 80. We made some updates to building and department revenue accounts and then any corresponding expense accounts. We updated interest earnings to reflect the actuals from this year. And then we also have a balanced budget for this year due to the increased interest revenues. Any questions on the second round?
Okay, go ahead, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say what I just would add is. We certainly had expected by now to have some type of information on the state budget process. I think we told you back in early May that the information we had was that the Joint Finance Committee would be looking at schools towards the end of May. So at this point, Randy's professional organization, ours, has not shared any insight as to where the discussions are landing. So we just don't have any guidance to be able to make any recommendations for changing what we're utilizing for our planning purposes. It is a little bit unusual not to have some information released. We certainly would have expected to have that by now. So the reality of it is the second draft of the budget looks very similar to the first one. Because we just don't have that comfort level yet with understanding where the state budget is going to go. Ally reviewed the changes, they're very minor in scope. What we're really looking for is getting some real information on where the state budget is going for schools. And until then, basically, we're at a holding pattern. And that was the message we shared with staff during our presentations over the last couple of weeks was what we have used. We communicated to everybody why we were using the estimates we were, but the fact that we are in a holding pattern until we receive some information. So we just wanted you to know that it doesn't look much different than what you saw last month because we're just waiting for information to come in.
So there's no questions on the second draft. We were looking for approval to take it to the full board.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Pass.
In the next agenda item, we have our annual leases for the 23-24 school year. We currently have the Wisconsin Youth Company, the Dane County New Teacher Project, or the Dane County lease, and then also the Dane County New Teacher Project. We are recommending approval of these leases. The Wisconsin Youth Company did increase $50 this year. The Dane County will stay at $75 per month, and then the New Teacher Project will also continue at the $300 per month.
Motion to approve. What do we do with the Dane County use? What happens there?
It will end, and they know it's going to end.
What do they do?
Oh, that's the Joining Forces for Families program. It's a social worker. But they're in Heritage and they know that this is the last year of the lease. And then they'll be looking for a community-based location to house it at.
They work with our social workers and our staff on families and movements. So it's a great program where we have a social worker from the county closer to kind of what the work is and the needs for them.
Yeah, the New Teacher Center is also in Heritage, and we also have our Waunakee Cares Coalition in the new Heritage, or the existing Heritage, so they all know that their offices will not be available after the next school year.
Okay, we get a motion to approve. Do you have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. 9.
23-24 employee wage increases. As mentioned before, we're still using the same assumptions based on the lack of information from the state budget, so right now we're still planning with 7.5% for all employee groups. Brian's here to talk a little bit more about the information that is presented, if you guys have any questions on that.
At this time, the only employee groups that we are moving forward for the board's consideration is the hourly employee groups. Two reasons. One, we know that we are still below market, comparable peer districts in Dane County in our hourly groups. And so there's a desire to keep our progress that we have been working towards over several years. And so we don't want to delay moving this group forward. Secondly, it does have an effect, a tremendously complex effect. We use an electronic timekeeping system called True Time. We want to really have those wages correct, or what we want to set them at starting for the July 1st payroll. And so having the board approve their changes, because we again, many members of this group are 12-month, our admin assistants, our custodian maintenance employees are all 12-month employees. We want to have those wages correct with that for that July 1st payroll pay period, excuse me. And then again, as we look at the relative cost of those employee groups compared to the size of our budget, it is an opportunity. We have an opportunity to advance the system and raise the system, people to take a step forward with their hiring anniversaries and still be able to safely operate our budget, even if for some reason the state budget doesn't come in favorably. This would be something that we could in Steve's and Allie's words, we could handle and still operate the budget.
What's it with the minimum wage at?
I don't know actually, Mark. I apologize. I'm
Okay,
not
no,
sure.
varies a little.
Oh, you mean what's our starting rates?
Yeah, yeah,
That would really vary on employee group.
but
For
what do you know for
example-
maintenance as an example?
Maintenance, I believe our starting maintenance person is or hourly rate would be 24.09 or 07. Our starting custodial rate's 18.17. Our regular paraeducators are just a hair under 16. Special educators are 17.
Okay,
Something.
that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, I could give you an exact number. I just
Yeah, no, that's
and
close.
so what this plan would do is, as I mentioned, staff have a hiring anniversary and we advance them a step or a move on that. It would allow everyone to do that this year. And if they were hired between July 1st and December 31st, they advance right away on July 1st. If they're hired on January 1st to June 30th, they advance on January 1st. So it has that movement within this. Plus, it has an increase to the system of 6.5 or 6%. And so everybody moves and the scale goes up, and that equals 7.5%.
And that keeps us pretty much where you want to be market wise.
I would say it would keep us from falling further.
So where do we stand in these positions? We're not at the top, we're not at the bottom. Are we in the mid?
We're
50%?
we would be lower middle. Generally, yeah, it would be. It would not be universally accurate to say that we're not the bottom, because in some particular hourly positions we are trailing everyone. Generally, we're I'd say use percentiles, but we're probably somewhere in the 25th to 40th percentile, depending on the group. And again, the goal that we're looking for is we'd like to get to that 50th percentile or the median rate or again, average. They're not the same thing necessarily, but that is something we're looking to target is kind of make sure that we're, solidly in the middle to make us competitive. And then hopefully, our culture and some of our other benefits can really draw people in.
What's your plan to bring people to mid-range?
The ultimate plan is when we get state budgetary information, and again, if we look at, Governor Evers' initial proposal is probably being a best case scenario. Whatever is working right now within the legislature is probably a worst case scenario. And then there's the negotiation process that they'll be both, because they need each other, the divided government. That we would, if again, state budget becomes favorable, then we have operate $1 million of operational referendum. New money that would allow us to infuse into these hourly systems and with an infusion of one time boost them to that good solid median or midpoint number. And then we would need to maintain that moving forward.
So this is not an action item on this committee. So again, this is also just like the previous one Brian talked about on the HR committee on Wednesday. But we wanted the budget committee to know that dialogue was taking place. And overall, this is fitting within the planning process that we referenced earlier. And so the long-term question is, where does that planning process go compared to the state budget? And if and when do we circle back to this once we learn more state budget information? But for now, it lets us move this group forward, connect prior to their first paycheck. But we are not bringing admin staff forward or teachers forward at this time, because we would like to see state budget information before we bring our largest groups forward for consideration, our salary groups.
So the strategy then seems to be, let's see what the state budget is, and if it's possible, enhance to that, and if not, then we go to the operational referendum to do some balancing.
I would say yes,
Potentially.
potentially. The first thing is to find out what the state budget provides, and what's the per pupil and what's the special ed aid, and then how can we utilize that mix to the best of our long-term advantage. And then if we can get the support that we believe we're going to get through the state budget, that would free up the operational referendum funds to do what we intended them to do,
Okay.
which was to get market pay, to
Right.
get to that average for folks, opening up the new schools.
Yeah.
And dealing with the eventual loss of federal aid. So
Right.
ideally, yes, Mark, that's
Okay.
what we're hoping, how we're hoping it plays itself out.
Okay. Thank you.
There's no
Any other
further questions for Brian, we can jump on.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, the next agenda item was tabled at the last committee meeting, so we made some adjustments to the facility use fee schedule and have brought it back for your guys' approval. So Rebecca, would you please pull that up? We did update the facility use fees to reflect the amounts that they were last year instead of the decreased amounts that were presented previously. And then I also just updated the spreadsheet to show that last year the custodial time was $30, and now it's increased to $45 or $50 depending on the task.
So remind us, what was lowered? I thought the facilities themselves were.
Yeah, so all of the numbers above the
$200
black line were lowered previously, and then we raised them back up to the approved amounts from last year.
Okay. And one of the questions I've got, and it came up last time, was, the village uses our facilities. I'm assuming that come through the village center. So kids sign up at the village center, and then we give our facilities for free.
Yeah, like basketball is a good example, the basketball program in the winter. The sign up is through the village center, and then they use like the middle school gym or the prairie gym at no cost, so that's correct.
Yep, so they use it for nothing unless there's a tournament or something where they charge you to get in, then it jumps into the schedule. Same with like BDL basketball, that's all Waunakee kids. And that's always, that used to be the old tri-county, so those are the things that we don't charge for. You know, they use all of our gyms and practices throughout the. Throughout the season, but when they have the tournaments, then they pay for use of facilities. That's kind of the trigger as far as when those get charged for those kind of Waunakee groups.
Well, both those groups are charging the fee to be participating in the groups, right?
Yes,
Most of them are, then shouldn't it at least be covered and make something? You know,
That's a conversation to have. I mean, that's something we've always looked at as.
you know, I know that they're, you know, if these other groups were, you know, giving it for free, then, you know, why should we be?
It's similar to like the Waunakee Wave and swimming. They don't pay for use of the pool. It's a community-based swim club that's generally all Waunakee kids. And that's a piece that, again, we don't charge for them to use the pool. And unless there's an event that they're charging entry fee, so.
I guess I would argue that if we raised the fee, it's gonna go back to the participants. And I think the philosophy is that because we want to keep kids, we're trying to provide it as low cost as possible.
No, I understand that, but shouldn't you at least cover the costs for the people that are servicing? You know, maintenance people, because our costs continue to go up. I don't know, what the village center, I don't know if they raise their fees or, you know, all these other groups. You know, I'm not saying charge for the facility, but at least, you know, the overhead to.
The maintenance fee, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you know, like your janitors, you gotta have janitors, you know, supporting this stuff.
I mean, it's a fair point, Jack, because we're not charging for any of that. That would require a policy change. So if there was interest in having the policy committee take a fresh look at this, it's been a few years since it's been looked at. That would be something you could bring up at the board meeting next week, that you would want that looked at, because you could add just a simple, you know, maintenance fee, you know, for the basic use of turning on the lights and the heat or the air conditioning or whatever it would be, just to say we at least want to break even. I mean, that's not unreasonable with the use of district facilities, but that would require a change.
Well, one thing we could do is look at which are nonprofit and which are for-profit. EDL is a for-profit organization. And so that might be something to consider too. We charge for profit versus not for profit.
Well, you look at, you know, our utility costs are going up, our, you know, staffing is going up. And, you know, these people, you know, they're at least covering, you know, I don't know what, village center they cover their.
We've done some of the custodial fees through Fund 80, Steve.
If we can, you know,
And so some of that's run through the community service fund for some of those additional costs.
we cannot run the utilities through Fund 80, so there's things we're limited in our ability. But if we charged a maintenance fee, we would put that in Fund 10, and we would really be looking to offset like utilities, you know, just basic supplies that they're using, et cetera, because the custodians, we do have the ability to pay for them out of Fund 80, but utilities, as you mentioned, Jack, have been a big cost impact, and we can't put that into Fund 80.
Do you happen to know offhandedly what series the policy you're referring to falls under, like in terms of hundreds? If you don't, that's fine.
I mean, I said the 800, so there's the community. General community policies are in the 800s, so I'm pretty sure that's where that one would be.
I was just trying to get
I'm
an idea of where
not
they
sure
were.
how it's articulated there. The most recent conversations we've had on this were really around. Goes back a few years, but it was around like Waunakee Wave, and we used to have two different clubs to swim in. And it was kind of, how are we gonna use, what are we doing for charges for fees? And then what was the percentage of like Waunakee participants? And that was a huge dialogue that took place here as we went through that. mean, the direction we received was that as long as it's primarily Waunakee kids, that we would not charge for the practice times. But anything that they would utilize for. Like tournaments and meets and that nature where they would charge, then we would charge for the full gamut as you kind of see there. Yeah, we can take a look at.
We should
Well,
probably just
the
at
other-
least review it.
The other thing, I think it was 2 years ago that when Aaron came in with a proposed wage increase, or the increases. It was a comparison again to the Dane County comparables, and we were trying to be kind of in the middle of that as well, not at the top, not at the bottom.
Right, and I think part of what you saw here was. That's where this chart came from. That's kind of when we started to add. We didn't really have this broken out 10 years ago. And so this was really kind of an effort to do so. And I think part of the reason that they were lowered was kind of looking at where they fell within the confines of your average lines, whatever around the county. But I think it makes sense to keep them status quo as far as where we've been this year. I don't have any concerns with those fees. So I would say we keep them there and we adjust them in the point in time when they do get out of, when they become low. But custodial numbers that you put in that are being presented make sense. And if we would like, I think you just bring this up as it comes to the board and we can take a look at it from a policy perspective again. And to Don's point, I'm not sure how it's articulated in the policy, particularly related to that. But our practice is related to kind of larger conversations we've had here, particularly over different groups that use our facilities that are primarily all want to keep things.
But I gotta believe that if you're looking at that maintenance, things like that, just cover the cost. Would be hundreds of dollars. Right. You know. These people have their costs. Even if it goes to the village center, it goes to the wave, it goes through all of these different areas. I'm not looking to make a profit on this, but. You know.
I think it would be an interesting conversation for us to look at, because when you look at. Let's just pick on BDL basketball, it's got a lot of kids, that's girls and boys. And they're running pretty much any of our gyms that are open, starting from almost immediately after school till probably 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So that's significant.
If you look at the number of kids and you amortize this over the number of kids, it's probably. Fraction. You're not charging any kid. For that. So, it's maybe $2-3 increase for their, but at least we're cutting the costs. Okay. Do we have a motion? We have to vote on this.
Oh, motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thanks for revisiting my voice. Anything else?
The only thing we'd like to mention is next Monday, we'd like to plan a July committee meeting. So state law requires the DPI to release what's called the state equalization aid estimate on July 1st, which then gives us the ability to hopefully dial in on the budget process a little bit closer. We of course hope that, the state's fiscal year begins July 1st. We certainly hope there's significant progress on the state budget this month. And that Ally and I would have the opportunity to present a third draft of the budget aligned with wherever the state budget goes. So our goal would be to see if this committee could meet again, potentially before the July board meeting or that morning. We probably need to avoid the week of the 4th because we just find out about this information on July 1st, which is likely the 3rd. With the 4th being off, our thoughts were that it probably would make more sense to either meet 30 minutes before the board meeting or the morning of the board meeting. But if you could just think about that for before next Monday when we schedule committee meetings.
You know, as we start preparing for the next budget. You know, I guess one of the things that we talked about was having forward looking, which I don't think we've necessarily saw this year. You know, if there is a desire to, you know, have a retreat or something like that, you know, what we should do in my mind, and obviously it's up to the board, but we should really look at that to say, where are these priorities? You know, one of the things that we're looking at was if we can't afford a program in a single budget year, if we can plan over a 3-year process where we start looking at socking some money away, you know, for that, then we get the funding to implement it at the appropriate time.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jack. We definitely want to revisit that because this spring, Ally worked with our admin team to get it updated. The challenge we've all had was related to the state budget and just not receiving any information. We've basically put everything on there on hold. And so we have an updated copy. We just have shared with our entire admin team until we get some direction of understanding what the fiscal picture looks like. We're just going to keep it on hold.
Right. The only things that haven't been on hold are things like the bilingual program, which we needed to move forward with. And then Tiffany has a lot greater flexibility with special ed funds, moving things between Fund 21, Fund 10, and the federal flow-through grant. So she has a lot of flexibility to be as creative as she can. So you saw some things come through that you approved that were part of that plan, that she just has a different funding scheme than anybody else has access to.
Understood. Yes. Any other comments? Concerns? For the good of the cause?
Looking forward to seeing what happens with the state. It's a lots on until that comes through.
Any
When-
future agenda items that you'd like to see?
Well, you already brought up the 3-year planning, so whether that's in the offsite or here, yes, yeah.
Did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the 3-year plan and something as we look forward to it, do we want to? The last time we saw the administrative plan, there were priorities stretched over 3 years. From our scope, should we still be looking at it as a 2-year budget, because that's what we have with the state budget, and not unlike what I just read in the newspaper again, in terms of facility priorities. They're not talking about year 3 down the road, they're talking year 1 within the 2-year budget. And so would that make sense to kind of at least consider that approach versus trying to budget 3 years out for something? Just
Sure.
food for the
I
discussion.
think there's a couple of things with the 3-year plan. First of all, I think the plan was put in place for multiple reasons. One was to just get everything on the table so you could see it. And so we haven't really weeded it out drastically. We've kind of put things out there. But there's significant dollars to be able to do everything on that 3-year plan. So I think it's a piece for us to revisit. For one, just to understand what some of the desires are on that. What are some of the higher priority needs? And then I believe we have to start thinking about how are we going to use our funds to do this. I mean, some of those are geared towards that you are working on, the things that Brian talked about today with regards to salary adjustments, and that's been an important part of the 3-year plan. We've talked about the things that have been coming with regards to supporting some of the concepts that Tiffany has. We've been able to find funding streams for that. Yeah, I think it's a good piece to bring forward and take a, so you can at least get reacclimated as far as what's on there and the depths of what's on there. And then we can kind of figure out how we want to kind of structure it moving forward. But right now, it's been really a large list of the items with the projected dollar amounts that are associated with things across the district. Absent facility maintenance stuff, this is all the other operational.
I think one of the things keeping it to like a 3-year, budget year is 2, right? So, you're looking at the second year and you don't know what's going to happen in the following budget. But I think if we look at it from a 3-year plan standpoint, and we, as a board, say, hey, this is where we want to be on these different items. It gives these guys direction as to, okay, this is what the board priority is. So, and that priority may change, given the board structure, whatever, but at least they have some planning guidelines to move forward. The other thing that I'd like to start to look at is this budget carryover. When we sit and say, okay, we need special playground equipment. That's the kind of stuff that should be taken out of the building budget. And one of the things that we talked about, we created this carryover, was funding was special, stoves and, different things that don't fall into the budget, but at least the building has money to put towards that. Where is this money going? When we talk about these building carryovers. Like to get a little better on that as well. So, anything else? I guess we can move towards adjournment. Motion is good.
Second,
All in favor?
okay.
Let's move on. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody, for coming this morning.